college student went to her job at a furniture store, but soon stopped responding after sending an alarming text message. The police began their investigation, and the case quickly captured the attention of all of Los Angeles, before making headlines across the country. When the full details of this crime became public, it sparked widespread outrage, and the echoes of it are still felt to this day. Subscribe to our Telegram to see more stories like this. Brianna Kupfer was born on April 9, 1997, in Los Angeles, California. She grew up in a large family with a younger sister and two brothers. From a young age, Brianna was known for being incredibly driven. She was a straight-A student, captain of the cheerleading team, and had many friends. She later attended the University of Miami, majoring in public relations, and also spent some time studying abroad in Australia. After graduating, Brianna returned home and enrolled in graduate school at UCLA, pursuing a degree in architectural and interior design. She had a deep passion for creative arts, especially fashion. She sketched designs, sewed her own clothes, and dreamed of one day launching her own collection. In addition to her studies, Brianna was very active, practicing yoga, weightlifting, dancing, and even boxing. After moving back to LA, she lived with her parents for a while, but eventually decided to move closer to the university, renting an apartment with a friend. To cover her living expenses, she took a job as a consultant at a high-end furniture store. On January 13, 2022, when Brianna was 24, she went to work her shift at the store as usual. That day, she was scheduled to work alone, as her coworker had asked her to cover the shift. At around 1:30 p.m., Brianna sent a text to her manager that read, "Can you call me? A customer came in and I'm getting a weird vibe." However, her manager didn't see the message for several minutes. When she tried calling Brianna, she didn't pick up. The manager then tried calling the store's landline, but there was no answer there either. Around the same time, a couple walked into the store and immediately noticed that there were no employees in sight. After walking a few feet inside, they saw something unusual behind a sofa. As they got closer, they realized it was a person, lying in a pool of blood. The couple immediately ran out of the store and called the police. When officers arrived, they found a young woman who was unresponsive and clearly deceased. Her phone was lying next to her hand, and from the scene, officers immediately suspected the victim had sustained multiple serious injuries. They quickly identified her as Brianna. The police handed the case over to medical examiners and began processing the crime scene. Of course, their first thought was that this was a robbery gone wrong. However, that theory was quickly dismissed. The attacker hadn't taken anything of value, not even the money from the cash register. In fact, detectives discovered that the assailant had left something of his own behind. On the counter where Brianna had been sitting, they found a voice recorder that was still recording. The police played back the recording, and what they heard left them in shock. It started with the sound of a bell on the front door, followed by Brianna's voice greeting a customer. A man's voice then said that he and his girlfriend were looking for a new sofa. Brianna asked him a few questions and suggested some models on display. The man then said he needed to call his girlfriend for her opinion and stepped outside. A short time later, he returned and asked for Brianna's social media profile, to which she politely declined. He then asked if she followed Biden's politics, and Brianna said, "No." The man said he would come back later, and Brianna offered him a business card, but instead of leaving, he started saying strange things. "It feels like this government has gone crazy," he said. Then he told her, "Put your phone down." A few seconds later, he added that he wasn't going to harm her. Detectives then heard the sound of the man drawing a knife. Brianna, clearly frightened, asked him to leave the store and told him she had called the police, but the man didn't listen. According to the recording, in the next few seconds, he lunged at her with the knife and began his attack. This went on for several minutes. Brianna repeatedly said she could help him, but the assailant wouldn't listen. After her voice went silent, the man left and the store fell quiet. A short time later, the recording captured the sound of Brianna's phone ringing as her manager tried to reach her. A few minutes after that, police heard the couple who discovered her body entering the store. In addition to this recording, there were other audio files on the device. Several months before the incident, the man had made a disturbing recording where he talked about his hatred for women. Detectives sent the voice recorder to the lab for fingerprint and DNA analysis and began reviewing the store's surveillance footage. Although there were several cameras, none of them captured the area where the attack occurred. However, the perpetrator was caught on camera when he approached Brianna's counter. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, sunglasses, and a face mask, making it impossible to see his face. The only things detectives could make out were his approximate height, build, and that he was an African-American male. The man was also captured on street cameras after leaving the store. During a thorough search of the store, forensic specialists found a bloody shoe print on one of the sofas. It appeared that Brianna had tried to run, but the attacker jumped over the sofa to block her path. They also found the weapon used in the attack. Its 7-inch blade was bent, indicating the immense force of the blows. Later, police received the medical examiner's report, which counted 46 separate wounds on the victim's body. There were no signs of any other form of assault. All the available information painted a grim picture for detectives. They were likely dealing with a criminal who had no motive other than the desire to inflict harm. Based on his clothing, police even considered the possibility that the man was homeless, which would make finding him even more difficult. While waiting for the lab results, detectives searched for other camera footage that might have captured the attacker. They soon discovered that about half an hour after the incident, he had entered a convenience store. They also got a tip from an employee at a chiropractic clinic near Brianna's store. She said the man had come in just minutes before the tragedy, asked a few questions about their services, and left. Police canvassed other businesses along the street and learned that the man had entered several of them but left quickly. Piecing together the information, detectives realized he was likely looking for a lone victim, as all the other stores had either multiple employees or customers inside. In total, he entered 6 businesses before he arrived at Brianna's store. News of what happened to Brianna spread quickly through the city, sparking a wave of outrage. Many people were frustrated that crime in Los Angeles was rising at an alarming rate, and that officials weren't doing enough to address the problem. On the contrary, they were making controversial decisions, such as implementing zero bail policies and reducing requirements for early parole. People were also angered by the fact that Brianna was working alone, which is likely why the attacker chose her as his target. However, all the public attention gave police hope that someone would help identify the suspect. They distributed his photos through social media and news outlets, and announced a substantial reward of $250,000 for information leading to an arrest. A large portion of this money was provided by the store where Brianna worked. Thanks to the massive reward, detectives received hundreds of tips, but none of them led to identifying the attacker. This went on for several days until they finally got the lab results. Experts found the DNA of a 31-year-old man named Sean Smith on the weapon. However, just as detectives had suspected, the man had no permanent address, making the search extremely difficult. Police issued a citywide alert while Sean's criminal history was leaked to the media. He had been arrested multiple times for misdemeanors like possession of illicit substances and theft. But he also had much more serious offenses on his record. He had once assaulted a police officer, biting his finger. Another time, he fired a flare gun at a car with a child inside. He had also been arrested several times for trespassing. Shortly before Brianna's passing, Sean had been granted early parole after another short prison sentence and quickly violated its terms. But he had simply disappeared, so he was never sent back to prison. This caused even more outrage among the city's residents. The criminal had repeatedly gotten off with short sentences and early releases, which effectively allowed him to commit this horrific act. Meanwhile, police continued to follow up on tips, but they were no closer to catching Sean. That was until January 19th, when they received another call. A man was driving down the street and noticed someone who looked like the suspect. He turned around and drove past him again to be sure and saw that he had the same backpack as in the released camera footage. Police immediately went to the location and soon spotted the man. He looked very much like Sean, but when officers approached him, he gave them a different name. However, police called for backup with a portable fingerprint scanner and confirmed that it was, in fact, Sean Smith. He was arrested but refused to admit his guilt. The prosecution announced they would seek the maximum penalty. However, the death penalty was off the table. Although many residents wanted that sentence, the local district attorney opposed capital punishment, calling it an ineffective and racist practice. A few months after his arrest, Sean underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which determined he was aware of his actions. Then, in a surprise move, he expressed a desire to represent himself in court, and his request was granted. But at the very first hearing, he insulted the judge, and the right was revoked. He was then assigned a public defender. Sean then officially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, despite the psychiatric evaluation stating otherwise. The main trial began in late August 2024, nearly 3 years after the incident. The prosecution had all the necessary evidence, including surveillance footage, fingerprints, and DNA. Therefore, Sean's only hope was to be declared legally insane. The defense, on the other hand, had no serious arguments for his innocence. For this reason, they declined to call witnesses or present any evidence. Instead, Sean's lawyer tried to convince the jury that the crime was spontaneous, not premeditated. despite the fact that Sean had scouted 6 other locations looking for a victim right before the attack. The lawyer also tried to argue that the story received so much media attention only because Brianna was white and Sean was African American, pointing to injustice. During the trial, the recording from the voice recorder, capturing Brianna's final moments, was played. Before it began, the judge allowed her family to leave the courtroom to avoid reliving the horror. The judge later prohibited the recording from being publicly released. The jury also listened to other recordings where Sean spoke of his hatred for women and his desire to harm them. After the trial concluded, it took the jury just 1 hour to find Sean guilty. Several months later, he appeared before the judge for sentencing. He was re-evaluated by several psychiatrists, all of whom concluded that he had no serious mental conditions that would allow him to evade punishment. Additionally, the judge played several recordings obtained from the jail where Sean was awaiting trial. In 3 separate conversations with friends and family, Sean stated that all he needed to do was act crazy, and instead of prison, he'd be sent to a mental health facility for 5 years and then released. Based on these recordings, the defendant was fully confident his plan would work. He just didn't realize that all of his calls were being recorded. Thus, the man was found sane and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, there was one significant problem. Due to new laws being passed in California, all offenders eventually gained the right to apply for parole, even if their sentence didn't allow for it. Despite this, the judge expressed hope that all of Sean's petitions would be denied, given the severity of his actions. As for his motive, the trial never established a specific reason why he did what he did to Brianna. Based on his own recordings, Sean simply had a deep-seated hatred for women and wanted to attack someone. Considering he entered 6 other businesses before Brianna's, it was clear he didn't care who his victim was, as long as it was a woman. And so, the criminal was sent away to serve his sentence. But Brianna's case didn't end there. It became another reminder of the imperfections in the legal and correctional systems, which allowed dangerous individuals to receive light sentences and get released early, even when they pose a clear threat to the public. However, no significant changes have been made to fix the situation, as California continues to maintain a very tolerant stance towards offenders. Despite these issues, in memory of Brianna, hundreds of people created a makeshift memorial outside the store where she lost her life. It was filled with flowers, photos of the victim, and signs calling on lawmakers to address the city's crime problem. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you found it informative. I also recommend subscribing to our Telegram channel, where we post the most interesting crime news from around the world daily, uncensored. Thanks for watching.